Hi, I'm Adam Coopersmith here for 10 minutes, Criminal Justice, Craig Wiernick's class. Today, we're going to be talking about Ponzi schemes. A Ponzi scheme is a fraudulent investment strategy that allows for a broker to collect money directly from his or her clients. In order for the scheme to be successful, it takes a great number of people to join and gain trust in the broker. This is done by the broker getting exorbitant returns on your personal investments. How does he do this? Due to the number of people investing with the broker, he has enough money that at the drop of a hat, he can report fake gains on everyone's portfolios. They typically focus on the new rich in order to ensure ignorance of reliable investment strategies. They claim that these people will receive high returns with little to no risk. The Ponzi scheme got its name because of a man named Charles Ponzi, where in the 1920s, when return rates were typically around 5%, he was promising his investors 50% return rates over a 90-day period of time. This was, of course, an exorbitant return rate for people that were only making 5% back on their investments. He claimed that they were putting all their money into postage stamp speculation, and he proved his point by buying small amounts of international mail coupons. He in turn was using his investors' money to line his pockets personally. Today we're focusing on a man named Alan Stanford. Stanford championed the largest Ponzi scheme to date. He cost investors billions of dollars, brought down companies, families, and private portfolios. Stanford was convicted of running this Ponzi scheme on June 14, 2012. Let's turn to our foreign correspondent in the field, Tony Danza-Buble, with the victims of this heinous crime.
Thanks, Adam. Mike Shaw did a little more research than the Lilies did when it came to choosing where to invest. With about $2 million on the line, he knew they had to make the right choice. Like the Lilies, that $2 million was everything Mike had, and losing it would mean having to start all over. What made you choose Stanford?
Well, I spent over 2 months researching places to invest, and their numbers were phenomenal. Their history was great. Everything I was looking at was satisfying. We had compared them with so many other banks, but Stanford really stood out among them all.
30,000 other investors made the same decision you did. Looking back, was there anything you feel you could have done differently? Were there any red flags at all during this process?
None at all. There were so many national figures that showed their support to Stanford Bank and all his other financial institutions. The president spoke highly of them. Some hotels relied on them, hospitals relied on them, and you said thousands of other investors also did too. How were we supposed to see anything that was wrong? There was no way we could have known. Even after hearing what Bernie Madoff had done, we had no reason to believe that there was a tie between them or that something like that could happen again.
When did you realize that the two were in the same field?
I first realized when I had to tell my family that we lost everything and there was no way that I would be able to support them.
When we come back on 10 minutes, we'll take a look at Carol from Florida, who made the same investments Mike did, and see how it affected her life and how she's doing now.
Have you been the victim of a white-collar crime recently? Has someone with high respectability broken your trust? Then call the law offices of Chuck and Barry Associates.
Welcome back to 10 Minutes. I'm Tony Danza-Buble. Sitting here with Carol Little, another victim of Alan Stanford's scheme. Now, Carol, how did you get involved with Stanford Financial Group?
Our broker, Mark Tidwell, he used to work for Merrill Lynch Bank, but then he left and began working for Stanford Financial Group. He began selling our investments and buying CDs in Stanford. So that's really where it all started.
Were you ever suspicious of any of the activity going on in Stanford Financial Group?
No, not at all. Like I said, they seemed like a really well-structured company, and my husband and I were just after the American dream. We just wanted to make money off of our investments.
What is your definition of the American dream?
It's a difficult question. I'd have to say it's, being well off financially and just having your family and friends around you.
Now, could you argue that Stanford was trying to achieve the same means?
Financially, yeah, he wanted to make as much money as he could, and I think that's part of the American dream. You want to be the wealthiest. But he was doing it through illegitimate ways. I was, investing in a real company and doing everything with legit numbers. He was not.
Carol, let me ask you one more question. How has your life changed since the activities that have ensued?
Well, I had to take up 2 jobs. I'm currently working as a nurse and definitely wasn't expecting to be doing that at age 66, but we're trying to pay off my daughter's college tuition, so doing what we can to make ends meet.
Thank you, Carol, so much for your time. Adam, back to you.
Due to Stanford and other Ponzi scheme artists taking their business overseas to Antigua and islands in the Caribbean, the U.S. warned investors to try and steer clear of bankers and banks that work out of Antigua. Stanford's bank issued certificates of deposits, also known as CDs, which he claimed were safer than U.S. government insured investments. Latin Americans on Antigua were worried about the sustainability of their government, and Stanford gave them an out, or so they thought. Investors were told that most of their money would be placed in financial instruments that would be watched over by officials in Antigua. What was actually going on with their money was quite different than what was being told. Most of the money was run by Stanford himself and the CFO of Antigua's subsidiary, James Davis. Most of it was placed in private equity and real estate, not what Stanford had addressed earlier. It was essentially going to line Stanford's pockets. Stanford eventually brought wealthy investors from the United States over to Antigua to try and persuade them to invest in the Stanford financial group. His sales pitch was to have them drop the U.S.-backed insured investments and try to invest in the CDs that he was trying to pass from Antigua. In early 2009, Michael Zarek gave a sworn deposition to the SEC. Zarek was a senior investment officer for the Stanford Financial Group. In it, he told the SEC that Stanford was falsifying numbers and making illegitimate claims on his clients' investments. Zarek also described a 3-tier system that the bank ran under. The first and second were used for cash and other investments. The third tier's purpose, which made up about 2/3 of the portfolio, was unknown. Many believe that this third tier was used to directly fund Stanford and his cronies. In the beginning of 2001, investors in the SEC alike began to question legitimacy of Stanford's business practices. They saw red flags on their portfolio that needed to be addressed. In order to clarify what these red flags were, we turned to Sean Khalifa Mann Jr., Ponzi scheme expert from the University of North Dakota. So, Mr. Khalifa Mann, in general, what are some red flags that I should generally be looking for in my investments?
Well, Mr. Producers, I have 3 that mainly what you should be looking out for. The description of the investment, that right there, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. So steer clear of those. Overly consistent returns. If he hasn't shown a loss yet, there's something going on. Something you should be worried about. And lastly, when you have difficulty receiving your payments, that means the broker has lost investors and no longer has money coming in, which means you can't get paid. So your money is gone. So
And there you have it. By 2012, Stanford's $7 billion Ponzi scheme came to a crushing halt. Money was put all over the world into foreign banks, which later came directly into Stanford's pocket. The FBI raided Stanford Financial on February 17, 2009, and the SEC eventually charged him with fraud based on the illegitimate schemes he had set up. Stanford later surrendered his passports, and the rest of his assets were frozen. That included all the money that was given to him by his quote-unquote investors. Their money was in his bank accounts, and they would never see it again. Homes were ruined, businesses were destroyed, companies were taken down, due to his greed and insatiable want for money. Stanford faced the eternity of his life behind bars. Alan Stanford faced charges of a $7 billion Ponzi scheme. He was brought up on charges in March of 2012 and was later convicted in June of the same year. He's currently serving a 110-year prison sentence. He is scheduled to be let out in April of 2105. The man who once had it all will now most certainly die behind bars. Now let me pose a question. Was the punishment suitable for the crime? Or is it simply a means of deterrence to try and deter people in the future from trying to start a Ponzi scheme like this ever again? With 10 minutes, I'm Adam Coopersmith. Thank you to Tony Danza Buble and Sean Khalifa Man Jr. and the rest of our crew. Have a great night. We'll see you next week when we interview King Kong and his wife Betsy on their travels to New York City.
This is the hardest record out.
I get it.